Hey guys, Simply Betta here. Today I have a bit of a story to tell you about how I nearly killed my beautiful, rare Betta Macrostoma pair twice. My macrostoma are in a different part of the house than most of my fish. They're currently kind of up here in this other spare bathroom we have. That's their tank, kind of behind me, right here. This was an experiment I tried like 4 or 5 months ago. I decided to see if moving them to a quieter, more secluded place of the house would encourage the male not to swallow every single mouthful of eggs he gets. So I thought maybe they'd spawn in peace and he'd be happier and maybe not eat all of his eggs. But spoiler alert, it did not help. He is still a big egg-eating jerk. Today, I'm gonna be moving my macrostoma and their tank down to my fish rack because I'm trying to consolidate all my fish into kind of one area of the house for the most part. And since this is a failed experiment, since he's still a big egg-swallowing jerk, I'm just gonna take this tank and move it back down onto my fish rack. So I was preparing for this and to film it, and then I remembered that I have a story to tell about how I nearly killed my beautiful Betta Macrostoma a few times. And I thought it'd be a good one to tell about how I nearly killed them, because why not share that? When I first got this beautiful Mac pair, I kept them in a nice big planted 60-gallon tank, just to make sure they were happy and healthy, and they were the only fish in that tank. It was just them and a bunch of plants, and I really liked how it looked, and I thought it was a great tank. They did great in there. It was nice and acidic for them. I was hoping that they would just kind of spawn naturally in there. They had a paradise, and they lived in here for a long time. Well, one day I noticed that I had a really, really bad planaria outbreak, and I didn't like that. I didn't like that I had a planaria outbreak, and it was pretty bad. It was pretty noticeable. So I decided to treat it. I went ahead and I bought this pretty well-known planaria treatment that was supposed to be fish safe and fry safe and safe for everything, and that's what I used. I treated my tank with this planaria killer, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. I can't remember the name of it, but then I'll go ahead and I'll superimpose an image of it. So I treated my tank. Sure enough, all the planaria were gone after this, but my macs started acting funny. They started looking very pale. They weren't eating. And immediately I was like, oh no, what did I just do? So I went onto one of my Facebook groups. I'm part of a couple groups of betta keepers and wild keepers and macrostoma keepers. And I just posted like what I did. Like, hey guys, so my fish aren't eating, they look really bad, they look really stressed out, and I treated my tank with this stuff. And I basically got a whole lot of people in a whole lot of different languages waggling their fingers at me. Oh, you shouldn't have done that. They can be a very sensitive fish to these kinds of treatments. So of course I'm freaking out at this point because I love this little pair. I fished them out of their big tank immediately as soon as I found that out, and I put them into a 10-gallon tank, my quarantine tank, just to get them separated, get them new water, somewhere safe, and so I could go from there. So I got them moved into this little 10-gallon tank, and they weren't eating. I was upset, of course, and I was just crossing my fingers. I was hoping, please, just come back, you fish. And I was really beating myself up over this, of course, as anyone would do, for making a mistake. But luckily for me, about a week later, they started eating again. Thank goodness, and I was so happy. But I didn't feel like I could put them back into this tank, into this 60-gallon tank. I was spooked. I was really spooked about it. So I just kept them in this 10-gallon quarantine tank kind of off to the side, and they were doing fine in there, and I just decided to keep them in there for a little bit so I could observe them, make sure they were okay, and figure out what to do next. So they stayed in there for a little while. I ended up dismantling my big 60-gallon planted tank because I wasn't really in love with it anymore. I wanted to change up my rack that I had, so just decided to disassemble it, take it down, and redo the rack. So that's the first story about how I almost killed this beautiful, rare, hard-to-find fish. Bad Taylor. I'm gonna go ahead and move these guys downstairs now and kind of go through the steps because let's see, what time is it? I have to go pick up my little girl from preschool pretty soon. So I just have to get that done. And then after I move them, I'll tell the story of the second time I almost made a terrible, terrible mistake. So to move the macrostoma, the first thing I'll do is I'm just gonna siphon out a bunch of their water and probably fill up this 5-gallon bucket and then plop them in and securely put the lid on. They're really good jumpers, very good jumpers. So you want to make sure that they can never jump out of buckets or tanks or whatever. I'm siphoning now. The reason I'm keeping a bunch of this water is because it's soft, it's more acidic than the water that comes out of my tap. And when I go to move them into the new tank, I don't want to just be plopping them into a tank full of completely different water. I don't want to shock them. I'm having to speak a little bit quieter, by the way, because there's a tiny little child napping right below my feet, so I have to be kind of quiet. I have my bucket of water now. I'm going to use a net and catch the fish. There's one. And two. That was pretty easy. So they're nice and safe in this bucket. And there's the lid. Always remember the lid. Now I'm free to go ahead and empty all the water in this and kind of take everything out. It's a pretty bare bones setup. I mean, this was a breeding setup with a bare bottom. There's just, a bunch of kind of complex driftwood in there, some plants. It's kind of hard to see. It's kind of cluttery, but that's how I wanted it. Here's how their new tank is looking so far. This is down on my rack. My little girl ended up waking up, so I stopped filming and I spent the day with her. And during the day, I brought this tank downstairs and I neatened up some of the Java fern. I cleaned up some of the moss, and I glued that flame moss kind of onto a few branches. That'll look pretty cool. There's also a few more pieces of driftwood in the back that I glued some more Java fern onto. It's gonna be really cool. So the reason there's not actually any fish in it is that I'm waiting on a bucket of RO water to finish. Also, this is just a temporary light up here. It's way brighter than what's going to be on this tank. While I wait for the RO water to, fill up my bucket that I need, I might as well tell the second story about how I almost killed my macrostoma, specifically my male, my beautiful, beautiful male who I love so much. He's so pretty. So bettas, actually all the fish in that family, are really, really good jumpers. Fantastic jumpers. You really need to have very tight lids without any big gaps in them when you keep these fish. One evening, I was taking care of all my fish, I was feeding them, and I must have not closed the lid all the way, which boggles my mind. Like, I had my lid, I had saran wrap over the lid because there were a few gaps just to make sure they didn't jump out, but I was in a hurry. Maybe I just did something wrong that night. I don't know. So I go to bed and, I'm sleeping, I'm all cozy. Then my husband decided that he needed a midnight snack. So he gets out of bed, he's heading to the kitchen, and he almost steps on my male macrostoma. It's just laying there on the carpet, just flopping around, already partially starting to dry. And of course he's like, ah! And he grabs the fish and puts it back in the tank and closes the lid. So that's how I almost killed my beautiful, beautiful male for the second time. I made a mistake. I didn't have the lid totally closed all the way, and the male jumped out. They are sneaky fish. Never trust them, ever. They will jump out of any crack that they can find. So I'm so happy my husband needed that midnight snack because he saved my male. And it was after that when I got my first spawn. So everything worked out. It is done. I got the water just how I like it. I put the macrostoma in. I didn't film it because it was pretty unceremonious. I just sort of scooped them up in the net and plopped them right in. Why not? The water was pretty much the same. It was at the same temperature too. They're kind of like, what? So they're hanging out there in the back. Overnight, this water's going to clear a little bit. It got kind of muddled when I turned on the sponge filter. Also, these bubbles should disappear pretty soon. So let me just make sure this is closed. Yep. Triple sure. Make sure this crack here in the very back isn't macrostoma sized. That's one really nice thing about these lids. These are the DIY lids that I made, the sliding ones. They're really good for if you don't want any cracks at all. This one needs a handle. So I'm gonna leave these guys overnight and come back to them tomorrow and hopefully get some good, happier shots. Thanks so much for watching, guys. The macrostoma are moved. I'm gonna have to clean up a bunch of a big mess that I made. It always gets messy when I start moving tanks and moving fish and moving water. So I'm gonna clean up, give these mags overnight to rest, hopefully get some good shots in the morning, and end it with all those good shots. So thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and have a great day. See you next time. What do you think, guys? You wanna bite my finger? Thinking about it? Come on. You lost your chance. Sorry.